Hey, welcome back. Field Archaeology 101. It's been a little while, and boy, have I been looking forward to this. This is one of my favorite Willy Wonka Arrowhead Factory days. When I walk in fields, there's certain things that I find that just spark my day. And one of them is a concavity. Do you know what a concavity is? Well, I asked an academic archaeologist a while back, why do you call these things concavity? He said, because a cavity doesn't sound real good. I'm like, oh, okay. So what I did is I wanted to kind of clue you in on it, and I got a Webster's dictionary out. And so con is to pursue carefully, study, fix in memory, concentrate, concavity. And a cavity is simply a concave surface or depression. So how fitting. And we're just going to take a look at some of the concavities that we find here in Ohio. Now, I am by no means the last word, on this particular phenomena that we find out in the field that the prehistoric people used, made, and did what they did. I've used this book extensively because I trust this man. He has earned the respect of not only field walkers, but the academics and pretty much people right across the state of Ohio. His book on stone artifacts is wonderful, and it's focusing on Ohio. So just so you know, the things that I'm sharing with you today, we're looking at Ohio. So let's flip over to my flip chart. And I got to thinking that, you know what? Everybody needs an archaeology dictionary. There's certain words, certain things that are going to come up frequently, and I'm excited for you to learn and grow and to feel really good about your hobby. So today, concavities, and I explained a little bit, look intensely into something at a depression, and we're going to look at these. And then in the past, I've talked about patterns, context, an artifact, and a geofact, and I need to start with these. So a concavity, because there are both geofacts and artifacts that are concavities. The geofact is something that Mother Nature made, where an artifact has been altered by human hands. So today, stone artifacts, tools with concavities. And I brought in as many as I could without using a dump truck, and so that you could get a really good look at what's happening here in Ohio, pretty much in north central Ohio. The concavities break down, according to Bob, into 4 categories. I have 5. And I've added a little star down there because it's marks. They're called dimpled stones. And everybody who walks at one time or another, we find a stone, a hammer stone, where they actually chipped out little places where they could hang on to them with their thumbs and fingers and things like that. That's a concavity. And it's a tool. It's a hammer stone, but they altered it to make it a real usable tool. So, pitted stones. What is a pitted stone? Well, they're made out of all materials, and I brought a bunch in. I want to show you quickly. They're made on igneous rock, and we're looking at mostly at igneous. We got a few sandstone pieces down here, but the depression or the concavity in some of these is very, very shallow. And if you look at this and you compare it to a cupstone is a really nice little bowl-shaped area, where the pitted stone is just a multiplicity of strikes, with the deepest part having the most strikes. So we're going to kind of pan across these pitted stones, and you'll see the diversity. Now this one is oxidized, and it's turned real red. It's a quartzite material. Here's the concavity. This is granite, and I've got my finger right there in the concavity. Slipping over here, another igneous rock, small little concavity. Now Converse says, and I agree with him, that these are the first really early archaic stone tools, and they just happen to be everywhere. My experience is that on every site I have that's more than an overnight campsite, I find these. So pitted stones are everywhere. Here's another pitted stone. This one is kind of more of a cup stone, another pitted stone, and I just wanted you to get a look at pitted stones. And then I want to talk a bit about cupstones. And I have a business card, not to promote this guy's work, but I wanted to make a mention of Scott. Scott is an artifact repair guy. He's done it for years. He's one of Ohio's best. And he repairs and puts artifacts together for people all over the United States. And but he's handled tons of artifacts. And I'm bringing this up because he's not a PhD. He's not got a master's degree. He just has a whole lot of common sense across a lot of years. And he's looked at cupstones just like you, just like me. Now we're going to move around a little bit. Here's a cupstone, and you can see the cup real nicely. And then we're going to slide down to the end of the table. And these guys just came out of the woods pretty recently. This one came off a Hopewell site, and this one came off the bank of a stream. So you can get cupstones with 1 or 2 cups, and you can get them with multiple cups all over them. So anyway, cupstone. And Scott brought forward an interesting thought. He said, you know, when I'm making artifacts, I need a billet. And he uses the real deal. He's not doing copper tools and things like that. And when he uses his billet, as he's striking flint, which is razor blade, as he keeps hitting it with a billet, it's going to get really rough. And it's going to impair his striking ability. So he needs to clean it and get it nice and smooth again. And he had a billet with him, and he took his billet and went right down in the cupstone and rubbed it back and forth. Came out like a baby's bottom, smooth and nice. And it's like, whoa. I think a light went on for everybody in the room, and I think Scott nailed it. So I'm sharing that with you because not everybody has all the answers to all your questions, and certainly you can't look and shouldn't always look to the academics, though they have a lot of good opinions, educated opinions. It's people who've been out in the field walking and spending a lot of time, whether they're collectors or repairers of artifacts. They have an opinion that's worthwhile. Now, I brought a pestle in, and because a lot of these have concavities on the bottom. And this one has some concavity and some paint, modern paint. And it's interesting because everybody always says, well, gee whiz, why all the work for these things? And these things can vary so much. And I've listened to a lot of opinions, but a guy back in the early 1900s said, you know what? I think if you turn it upside down and sit down on the ground, you can take your legs and clamp this. And now you have a good working platform. And that guy was just simply a buyer and seller, a collector of artifacts. No academic background whatsoever. But he's probably very close to what these things were used for. Another concavity that we find on Pestles. So theoretically, the cupstones are pretty much middle archaic to early archaic, but I just mentioned that I found one on a pure Hopewell site, and then we have again the pittids, which are the earliest, the most abundant of all these concavities. Now I'm going to add another category to this. And if we sweep over here, we've got the pitted stones, we have the cup stones, and then Bob calls this group stone containers, and it's an interesting name. And if we pop over here for a second, we're going to look at some of the things that he includes in that for stone containers. These were actually nature made them. These were not made by prehistoric people. So in essence, these are geofacts that have been altered a little bit by people. And this happens to be an abrader right here. So it is a type of depression or a type of concavity. And you can see that these things can be multiple sizes, depths, shapes, and sizes. Some of them have a lot of work where they've touched up. Some are just barely used, and some are just little itty-bitty guys. So how do we know if these are artifacts? Now I'm going to put the lid down here. And it goes back to a word that we had up here a minute ago, and that word was context. Keep in mind the context. Does it belong there? And is there any pattern? You know, are we normally finding these over here, and this one is obscure? How did it get here? And chances are it was moved by man. Okay, so now we need to move past the geofact into the possibility of an artifact. Another example of context, I'm interested in the paleoculture. So when I read or look at a lot of books in my area, it'd be Michael Gramley and a few others, we look at pure paleo sites and we see tools that are indicative of pure paleo sites. Well, over in our area, most of ours are multi-component. And so if I'm finding a tool on my multi-component site and it's always turning up on pure paleo sites, well, the context of the situation says that even though this is on multi-component, probably it's going to be a paleo on a multi-component site. So again, looking at all these things and keeping all these things in mind. Coming back down here, we don't find a whole lot of steatite in Ohio. However, along Ohio, down around the Ohio River, there seems to be an abundance of steatite. Now, my dig site that I'm working on is near Coshocton, Ohio, and this little tiny container came out of a fire pit. It has a little nipple with a groove where they could tie it, possibly wear it or whatever. And when you look in, it is just classically smoothed out by the fingers. But this has been altered. This is a mineral that they cut out of a huge piece of steatite and they formed it into this. So Bob does not place these in the category of stone containers. But the diversity, again, in these stone containers is huge. We call them concretions, which is basically a material, a softer material with a mineral deposit that is formed or is forming all the way around it. And so some examples of that is a concretion. And this is one that was laying in the field like that. And I had friends with me when we were walking. I said, hey, there's a concretion. And considering the context that these don't belong here, and usually when they are here, they're usually an artifact, let's check it out. So we turned him over, and lo and behold, it had been altered a little bit by people, prehistoric people. And more examples of concretions. This one is just charred from being in a fire pit. Some of them are very delicate, very little. And then what we find on glaciated areas in Ohio is just the raw concretions. And this is what they look like when they're out laying in a field. But down where I walk in Coshocton, those don't belong down there. So keeping all things in mind, when we see one, we pick them up and look them over. But basically, these are what we call concretions, and this is what we find in Ohio. So how well distributed are these? Well, let's go back to my dig site, and I love it. I wish I could take every one of you to this site. And we're just going to quickly look at some fire pits. Fire pit, a little concretion that was around the fire pit. And with a good hand lens, you'll see that they touched up the lip of this concretion all the way around. Okay? Fire pit, another little concretion. Very different than they normally are. We don't know what they were doing with those, but we find them absolutely in the midst of living situations with the prehistoric people. Another fire pit, two more concretions, and obviously this one is clear. This one broken. Actually, we broke it accidentally in the process of excavating, and it hasn't really been cleared or cleaned out or sanded out yet. Another fire pit, another concretion, and another concretion. This one, they've worked on the lip, but they haven't really done much inside. Another fire pit, another concretion. The lip has been worked on. The inside has not been pecked out or polished yet. Another fire pit, and here we go, another concretion. These do not belong on the site. The site is pure sand, and anything beyond sand has probably been hauled in. So this happens to be what Bob calls a stone container. The mineral or the geologic term for it is concretion. Another fire pit, another concretion, another fire pit. Well, this one's kind of fun because this is hematite. And when we look at this, probably beyond 10x, 20x, I'd say, you can actually see the grinding marks where they were working on this hematite to make their red ochre. But look at this one. This shows evidence of having been an abrader of sorts, where they would run something in here possibly to put another edge on it for whatever reason. All this coming out of fire pits. So, and then I stuck, on here what I call dimples, and it's just because I didn't know what else to call them. Stone bowls and dimple. I want to mention the dimple here real quick. And it would be something like this. When you look at this guy, there, these are just little tiny dimples, but it has been used as a hammerstone. And if you hold on to these dimples, it just locks right into your hand and you can do some serious work. Here's another one. Dimpled hammerstone. Boy, you can hold on to this and just peck, 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 and just peck away your flint until you got what you need. Dimples. And then finally, Bob mentions what he calls a bowl stone. These are rare, and they don't turn up a lot. Very little is known about them. We don't know what culture they belong to. And this is the only one that I got, and it came out of Ross County, which is down near the Ohio River, southeastern Ohio. And one of the characteristics of these guys is that the distance from the inside of the bowl, the diameter, is always smaller than a line from the outside across to the outside like that. And then the material, they can be just about any kind of stone. This one is probably leaning more toward an igneous than it is sandstone. Very rare, unusual, and I've never found one in the field, and I don't know anyone else that has either. A friend of mine had this and said, "Hey, how would you like to have a bowl?" And I'm like, "Of Wheaties?" Fine. So he gave it to me. We have just done the Tour de France with concavities. Concavities, we talked about a focusing down in on, scrutinizing and contemplating a depression, concavity. It's a whole classification of stone tools. We have 4 that are pretty well defined in Ohio: the pitted stone, cup stone, stone containers, stone bowls. And I've added dimpled because anybody who's walked for years, you know that you find stones where you can see they were altered by human beings to create little thumb holds or thumb forefinger holds. So I stuck a 5th category in there. And always there's anomalies, and they're everywhere. And I wrote a few down. The abrader stone is not one that was covered in his book. And the other one is vug, V-U-G. This might be new for some of you. You can put it on your archaeology dictionary word. A vug is kind of like an inclusion of material that's kind of fallen out and created a hole or a deep concavity in a rock. And then discoidals, which we find a lot of over around Dayton, Ohio, down along the Ohio River. And then fossils. Fossils get confused all the time for artifacts, and we find fossils that have holes in them that if you look at them real carefully, more than likely they're a crinoid stem, or there was a crinoid stem in there at one time. And then I added my dimpled stone. So a real quick run through cup stones and pitted stones, remembering that the pitted are the most common and the earliest stone tool in the state of Ohio. Going back through my collections over the years, I noted that on every significant campsite, always I find these, and in some cases 10, 15, 20 at a time. Many times these are flat on one side with the dimple. You flip it over and they're rounded. And if you look at it, there's even some alterations on the side. This is a variation of a type of pitted stone. Any questions? Hey, thanks for coming along with me today. I appreciate it. It's good to get back, and some good food for thought here. Hope to see you again real soon.